Thanks everyone and welcome to the second plenary. So what we have over the next hour and 50 minutes is, first of all, Paul and Vishali will be giving a kind of run through what is the current experience developing the CMIP7 deck forcing suite. And then we'll go back to Zeb, who's going to kind of provide a summary of the challenges that we discussed in quite a lot of detail this morning. Because then we're moving on to, we have 5 of our funders that are joining for our funders panel. They'll each give a sort of 5-minute introduction to their funding landscape and their activities within sort of forcings and relevant areas. And then we'll have a bit of open discussion on the sort of funding challenges and potential solutions as well. So I'll hand over now to Paul and Vishali.
Great, thank you, Eleanor, and welcome to everyone who's joining us online as well. And hopefully everyone enjoyed their lunch. So if we can just kick off with the first slide here. So Vishali and I have been tasked with trying to provide a heads up, particularly to folks that are attending for the first time. We've had quite a number of conversations over the last couple of days, and many folks in the room are pretty familiar with the environment that we're operating in, but this is for the benefit of everyone. So this is what the landscape of WCRP, ESMO, CMIP, etc. looks like. It's kind of complicated, but when we're actually focused in on the forcings, where this is relevant is the CMIP7 task teams, of which the forcings task team is leading the development of the forcings, and the forcing dataset providers, which are actually mostly part of the task team. So we actually have interactions across a number of other folks, including Matt, who was invited to be a member of the task team, but he actually had another responsibility in the said task team. So it's just good to know that we've got this broad community that we're interacting with. And you can see there's other things like OBS for MIPS and other activities as well that are represented under this big banner. So jumping through who we are. So there's quite a number of us that are attending here. So Vishali and I at the top there, and then we've got all the members of the task team represented there, some virtually, some in person. It's been really great to connect with people here. And the next slide, please. And importantly, a lot of the agencies and institutions and funding that's providing everyone the support that they need in order to be part of this. So thank you to everyone and institutions and agencies that are facilitating our engagement and the development of the forcings again. Next slide. So just to try and calibrate as to where we are at the moment. So we've got around about 10 core forcing data sets, and you've got the leads of each one of these data sets listed here, and also the funding status too. So there are a number of data sets, hopefully the funding providers can give us some perspectives on as well, that are funded actively by DOE, for example. The open biomass burning emissions by Margaret and Guido, that's not obvious as to how they're actually supporting themselves there. We've got NASA's funding, ESA through the IPO funding, Horizon Europe, and quite a different assortment of different support that's facilitating the development of these CMIP7 forcing data sets. Very grateful for all of this, but one of the things we really wanted to focus in on today was, can we do a better job of bringing this patchwork quilt together and trying to coordinate the activities, particularly because of the fact that ESMWF and quite a number of other operational centres, for example, are dependent upon these data sets. And it would be great to try and figure out a way of trying to do this in a more sustainable way going forward. Next slide, please. So the forcings task team was established back in 22-23, and initially we came up with a number of goals, and these goals are highlighted here. So effectively to evaluate and document the CMIP6 era forcing collection and identify issues, coverage gaps or omissions through a community survey, and we did that, and it was really useful to get the feedback. I'm not sure if ESMWF comprehensively replied to that survey. I think we did get some feedback, but it wasn't obvious through the survey responses how deeply you guys are involved in using these data sets. So it's been great to elucidate that information over the last couple of days, and today in particular. So the next thing was also identify forcings for current and next generation climate models in support of the activities for CMIP7. Then work with the teams to identify, develop, document and deliver an updated and expanded forcing collection in near real time. And then coordinate with the modelling groups to run evaluation effectively of these forcing data sets before CMIP7 was realised too. Next slide, please. So this graphic attempts to try and capture the history of how things have been done in the MIP framework. So that table there has a lot of information, but the take home is you've gone from the left, which is CMIP1 back in 1989, through to the planning now for CMIP7. Forcings have become way more complicated. And one of the reasons they've become more complicated is because the experimental protocols are more complicated than they used to be back in AMIP, for example. And also model complexity has been increasing over time. And so there's a graphic on the left-hand side there that tries to capture schematically, in a pretty simple sense, the evolution of models that went from atmospheric models only really back in the 1970s through to these complicated Earth system models that also are starting to incorporate things like active ice sheets, etc., moving forward from today. Next slide, please. Did you want to? No, happy to. Okay, I'll keep going. So we had our first forcings drop in with the modelling groups back in June 2023. And this was the timeline that we actually kind of set back in June 2023. So 18 months are thereabouts ago. So we had a historical forcings aspiration to generate these updated data sets in 24 with the revisions in 2026. And then the scenario forcings back then we thought were unlikely before early 2026. If we jump further forward now in time, you can see that 6 and almost 7 of the 10 data sets that are required for the AR7, CMIP7, AR7 fast track deck simulations are in place with an expectation we're going to get Steve's data sets very soon. And so that's the V0 that we'd planned for. And so we're pretty close to being on time for that. But the revisions that we're planning for these final data sets has moved forward almost a year, which is kind of astounding. And it seems to me that we're on track to deliver that and meet that milestone, which is great. Scenario forcings as well. There's a lot of progress that's going on, and that's also moved forward a year or 6 months thereabouts. So at the moment, we've been pushing pretty hard, and we've managed to meet the milestones and actually beat them in some senses, which is kind of an astounding feat. Congratulations to everyone involved, and hopefully we make it. I'm sure we will. So the next step was then to try and kind of outline just visually what we're trying to do here. So the grand plan again was to build the forcings, test them, which we haven't done before, and then implement them for CMIP7. And so what this graphic tries to show in the blue at the top there is model simulations in CMIP land, and then in the green, the forcing development, and then also the testing. And there's an overlap there in the CMIP6+ phase, which is very much trying to learn by doing. We've already managed to get a number of modelling groups that have started to look at these new data sets that have only landed in the last couple of months. And we've identified some issues that would be great to fix before we get to that, that hard line and CMIP7 commences. So we really need to try and make sure that in the next couple of months we're working effectively, identifying issues that are deal breakers, trying to resolve them all, and then work forward on CMIP7 in 2025. So again, the nomenclature we've come up here is the CMIP6+ phase, this kind of training phase before we get to a CMIP7. And then once things are finalised, CMIP7 will commence. And an important point to note here, I think, is that this is science, this is iteration, we're going to learn as we go. But importantly, we're actually giving ourselves a number of months to try and get better organised than we have done in the past. And I think that's really prudent. Hopefully we'll pay dividends in the future. So I'll hand over to Vishali.
Thank you, Paul. So this slide basically just shows screenshots of what the process has been once the data comes to, once the data providers come to Paul and Zeb when they're ready to upload the data. So as a first step, we've helped, Zeb's work especially has helped to standardize the metadata and the file format standardization. There's now a data validation tool that Zeb has created that helps to ensure that the data files that go online meet all the requirements of ESGF. He's already started working on putting together a forcing dataset documentation page. We have a template to gather information from the individual data providers. And once we have all that information, that can easily feed into this redocs document that's online. And then the data providers will have ways to update this much more smoothly and without having to connect it on all of this manually. And then, of course, we have this GitHub discussion repository where we want feedback, we iterate, and then that leads to updates in the data sets themselves. So there is a nice process that is definitely an improvement from where we were in CMIP7. Okay, so what's work in progress? All of this will pretty much happen in parallelly. We are in that process of testing and evaluation of data sets and iterating on all of the issues with the data set providers, and of course, updating the data. There will be coordination, and especially after what we've heard in the meetings, especially yesterday, on coordination on data sets that have been identified as modeling center needs for CMIP7. Data documentation I already mentioned. And then, of course, we finalized the CMIP7 PI control protocol. Scenario map harmonization is a top priority. And then following after that, there'll be production of scenario forcing data sets to go all on ESGF. So with that, I think that was it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paul and Vishali. Have we got any questions for Paul and Vishali on that? No? Any online? No? You're so clear. Okay, well, we can maybe then make back a bit of time and move on to Zeb, who's just going to run through sort of summary.
Yes, I will. You're too fast for me, so just give me 30 seconds to
Sorry.
sort myself out.
Sorry, Paul, did you have your...
No.
This, and then... Eleanor, can you help me?
Bottom left corner.
Thank you.
Play button.
Super. Thank you, Bryony. Much appreciated. All right. Yeah, I think I'm ready to rock and roll. Apologies to those who were here this morning because they've already seen a lot of this once, but some of it's worth repeating. And for those who weren't here this morning, this will be a helpful intro into where we got to in our discussions earlier. So yeah, I'm going to kind of talk about the current status as I see it, and also a little bit how the room sees it, because it's got some of the feedback from that, and then potential challenges for sustained mode as we look towards considering whether that's possible or not. So I'll run through three things. So a quick is a recap of Plenary 1, just a reminder, and then I'll look at where we are today, and then potential challenges for sustained mode, which we might want to enact in future. So the discussion we had in Plenary 1 was partly about what a sustained mode might mean. And what we started with was basically approximately annual extensions of our input forcing data based on latest observations. And that would support us for doing much faster updates and analysis, particularly as world events happen. I know eruptions happen, changes in observations of various things which have completely escaped my mind. And then also an agreed frequency at which we pull in the new science into these kind of more sustained mode settings. And that is important because some users actually don't want the latest science. They want a stable data product more than they want the latest science. And so if you're going to support them, you need to kind of have them in mind as well. But this kind of thought for sustained mode wouldn't cover all of the use cases we heard this morning either. So we heard this morning a little bit about potential near real-time stuff, and if we did it this way, we wouldn't capture that. I think that would be a much bigger lift. I think it would be tricky. I think it's definitely worth thinking about, but there's kind of, we're already starting to see things we think are sort of easily in scope, and then things which would be much more challenging. So then when we look at, okay, where we are today on this picture, and this is how I think about it. So I think you've basically got three streams. You've got your historical forcing stream, you've got your scenario forcing stream in blue down the bottom, and then you've got a kind of data standardization and publication stream in green on the right. And in your historical stream, you start with raw observations, then you have the science bit, which is to create the forcings from those raw observations, and then you spit them out in some intermediate data format where, depending on what you're doing, that'll look different people. On the scenarios, it's very similar. So you start with your inputs, which generally come out of IAMs, making emission scenarios. Then you do your science to make projections based on those. You end up with projections in some intermediate data format. And there's an extra step in the scenarios, which is to then harmonize. So you need to make sure that your scenarios run off the history smoothly and don't have kinks and jumps and all sorts of things which give Tim headaches because his bias model goes crazy. And then the last bit is this bit in green, which is about data standardization and publication. And so the big part there is just processing the data into standard formats. That's uninteresting for most scientists, but for users, it's very helpful because you can kind of write code once and use it on any data. Then you end up with data you can publish on ESGF, and then there's a whole ESGF publication step, which at the moment seems quite smooth, but I'm sure Paul has stories about just how difficult that is, and Sasha, if he were here, would also be able to tell us the demons that lie in that step. So I think this is basically how the process works, more or less. And so you can see that on the left, there's real kind of raw science, and on the right, there's less science, more just keeping things organized, and then you have this transition sort of between them as you go along. You can look at it in slightly more detail. I'm not going to go through this slide, but I think the slides will be available later. So if people are interested in translating my vague words into something slightly more precise, that's there. I think really the key takeaways for me is that one, a lot of these steps are research. So there's lots of research still required. We're not going to be switching to an entirely sustained mode tomorrow. It wouldn't make sense. I think the other is that our current sustained mode capacity is very limited. We do this in a way that doesn't look anything like a sustained mode. And I think the best model for how you would support a sustained mode is quite unclear. But having said that, one of the things that came out of this morning's discussion is that there are models of this around the world, either within institutes primarily. I'm not sure if there's any that are across institutes, but I know Gavin mentioned some at NASA. I'm sure that C3S have got some nice examples of how you make this all fit together. And so they would be ones to learn from, but I guess we might have some real complications when you try and take this to a global scale across multiple institutes. So I'm not sure how much that complicates things versus meaning you just learn from experience that others have had. So then we come into this question of potential challenges for a sustained mode. And so I think one of the good things is that obviously we've done CMIP before, and as Paul just showed for the CMIP7 fast track, we at the moment think we'll deliver quicker than we initially thought. So we've got a base from which we could start to build a sustained mode, I think. And I'll put the reminder in there again, because otherwise Paul will get mad that, don't forget how much research work is still required. That's a very big part of the puzzle. And Ben in the room made quite a good point this morning that you want some immediate, easy next steps to get started with. And I think those are also relatively clear, I would say. There are some, for most data sets, I think we could go to an annual extension and it wouldn't be a crazy lift in terms of resources. And I think we've seen that already with how effective some of the CMIP IPO's bridging funding has been. It's not crazy funding, but it actually makes a really big difference to people. And so I think that's a potentially relatively easy lift and one to consider if we want to even start exploring how this might look before we go and do, shoot for the moon. I think the first step is also not too hard to imagine. And then we get into some of the challenges. So the first one is kind of support for raw observations. I think that's a concern for all of us always. And there's a couple of raw observational networks in particular. When you ask the forcing providers, are you nervous? There's a few they mentioned. So one is EDGAR, where Steve says you're constantly worried that it's not going to be done in a couple of years' time. And then I think satellites, where the big feedback seems to be that the continuity between different missions is always a real concern. And if you get really different instruments on missions, or you just don't have a mission which follows up the previous one, or it's data's really hard to join up, then that can make your life as a forcing provider very, very difficult. So I think that's something that needs to be emphasized and realized by the funders and also recognized as much as possible. And then if you actually look at who provides the data or who provides the funding for the raw observations, there's a few well-known names, but otherwise the funding is surprisingly diverse. So NASA is supporting at least 5 of our forcing data sets. NOAA is supporting at least 3. There is this, I've captured it as various because it was basically when you look at the data provider or the network, it's a network of lots of institutes, so it's unclear who exactly is funding this once you dig down the bottom. But that would be an interesting one to tease apart a bit more, and it might mean that, you know, NASA's number isn't 5, it's actually 8 once you unpeel the onion. UK Met Office is key for 2 of our data sets. The IAMs underpin all of our projections, I would say, except for obviously the natural forces. And then there's lots of other funders, which are, you know, at the moment only relied upon by a single data set. But I think for any one of those data sets, it would be painful if that if those raw observational networks disappeared. So there is quite this deep tree once you unpack it of dependencies. So that's one challenge, definitely just raw observations and how do we make sure they keep going. And I think the other one is that the current status is that a lot of this kind of processing pipeline relies on forcing providers running things locally with various levels of reproducibility. And for a sustained mode, it needs to look quite different, right? There's a big difference between I got this to work once and then I try to forget that nightmare for the next 6 years and then we'll deal with it again in the 7th year, versus I pull this up every 6 months or 12 months and rerun the thing, or once a month, depending on what we're trying to do. So I think that's one challenge, right? Which is like for a sustained mode, you really need to run the same thing over and over again. And that's not really what scientists are trained or funded to do, and that's not what their career incentives line up with. And so I think the result is that at the moment, we've got either no or limited capacity for the maintenance that a sustained mode requires. But as I said previously, I don't think it's a big lift to slightly turn people's attention onto that maintenance, and then they can do it. And then I think the other one is, yeah, just in terms of the infrastructure that sits underneath this, it's surprisingly thin. So in the input for MIPS project, which is not dealing with that much data in the scheme of things, there's basically 3 of us who are trying to make sure that it gets published, it follows standard formats, it's available. At the top of the ESGF tree, there's obviously a much deeper ESGF tree, which keeps all of that distribution network going. But I think this limited capacity basically means it's hard for the forcing providers because they don't get that much support to get their data into the right formats. And it's hard for the users because things that should get caught don't get caught. And so then the users end up having to deal with it. And Unka made a very nice point this morning about science users are very, very patient. They will put up with all manner of sins. But if you move to a sustained mode, then it looks very different and your users have very different requirements and they're much more sensitive. And so you need to be much, much better at making sure that your data makes sense and is documented and is findable. And when you go to get it, it's still there and your links aren't broken and stuff like this. And yeah, I mean, my personal take on this is that we don't have the capacity to support a sustained mode already because it's no one's job. And so, yeah, there aren't really enough people whose entire job is to provide a solid base for climate science. So if you thought about a chemistry lab with no lab techs, that would not be great fun. And I think in climate science, we have at the moment labs without lab techs and we all pay the price. I think that's an interesting question for funders to consider whether we can make that easier because it's not a huge lift, but I think it makes a huge difference. And I think we underestimate how much of a difference it would make. And then one other thought is that we obviously can't do everything everywhere all at once, but I do think we need to get better at tracking everything everywhere all at once. So knowing, you know, is this raw observational networks funding going to end in 2 years and what might we do about that? Is this forcing providers funding going to end in 2 years? How can we help them out so that they get the letters of acknowledgement and recommendation they need to then convince a funder to pick them up again and keep them going? And so I think we can do a much better job of that. And I think the CMIP7 has done a great start. And if we can continue that, I think that'll be a huge benefit. I think the other one, which we talked about this morning, is just like acknowledgements and understanding the dependency tree. So I think the forcing providers in this room had no idea how many people were using their data, and getting better at that, I think, will make a big difference as well, because you start to be able to make the argument that this matters much more easily. You start to be able to understand where your data is going, who's using it. And yeah, I think these things are solvable. You know, we have very good DOI networks. It's just a matter of, it needs to be someone's job to think it through, I think, because it doesn't happen by accident. Oh yeah, to summarize my thoughts on this, I think we know roughly what a first attempt at a sustained mode could look like, especially in terms of science methods. I think it's pretty clear the current model can't support a sustained mode that easily. This morning's discussions made pretty clear that software is a big part of the problem and the solutions, but I think it's also worth keeping in mind it's not the only thing. There are big social elements to this, and organisation really matters if we're going to do this on a global scale. And then at the end, I've put a few questions to consider. So, how would we best implement the sustain mode? I think the question of why do we want a sustain mode is also worth considering, but our users this morning helped a lot to understand that. How would we organise our contributions in this relatively high-profile space? How do we ensure that contributors are acknowledged appropriately? And then the final one is, which users can we support? Which some people would say is probably the first question to ask. On this slide, it's the last. So yeah, I'll stop there and we can go over to open discussion, I think.
Thanks, Ed. Do we have any more kind of reflections on the point Zeb has raised here, or anything else that you feel is missing before we go to the funders panel? Anka?
Zeb, in one of your earlier slides, before slide 8, I believe, you said research is still needed. We are not ready yet to move to, or we won't be able to move to sustain mode tomorrow. Well, I fully agree with the last sentiment. I think we should avoid making it look like it's either or. I think forever you'll have to be both, going at different speeds, communicating with each other. But I think sustain mode is not ever going to be a replacement to the research that's needed to happen in the background, just to avoid the opportunity for people like me now to get the wrong end of the stick if they read this.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Robin?
Yeah, yeah, thanks for the great summary. Is it worth acknowledging that some things are a lot easier than others? So if you want greenhouse gas concentrations, of particularly the major ones, if you've got the one for this year, you just need a rule about how to adjust the scenario so that it blends smoothly, and that's quite easy to do. It's just a few numbers, but obviously all the land surface stuff, that's much more difficult. So if you can decide which ones are the easy ones and then tackle those, that would be very helpful, even if we have to park for a bit longer the more difficult ones.
Steve online?
Sure. Yeah, great presentation. One additional thing I wanted to add is that for sustain mode, I think there needs to be more centralized diagnostics, and that takes a bit more person power, at least to set up. We don't have the reason to do the means to do that now, but particularly when you're talking about sustain mode, you need to compare old with new data sets. And in this case, a lot of the data sets are gridded, or most of them are. So I think you can do some grid-based diagnostics regionally, globally, time series, difference maps. There's a couple different ways of that. And I think having that sort of capability for all data sets as they go in a sustain mode would be very important, because we do that with SEDS, right? We always differ with what we did previously, and that was way different. Do we make sure that's okay, right? So I think having that centrally to check for big problems, and of course I think you could have a reject flag if things differ by a factor of 2. I think you have to have a manual override to accept it, right? Because you don't really expect that, or whatever number. So yeah.
Okay, Carlo.
Well, I add my name to the list of people who express appreciation for the presentation. Very, very clear and very, very nice. My comment was about the blocks diagram that you showed at the beginning, logical one. And it's just a comment because I think it's easy to think that the right-hand side blocks, the one about delivering and standardization, are the sustain mode. And I rather think that the sustain mode actually permeate the 3 boxes. So it's about a modus operandi rather than just a specific task. Thank you.
And Helene?
Thanks. Yeah, I wanted to ask about the funding. So there were a couple of people on that table who it wasn't clear who they were funded by. I'm wondering if we could find that out, because that would be useful. And the 2 that are funded by the IPO bridging, I wondered if there was a route to a more sustainable one, or whether that has to, finding funding for them has to be part of the answer.
So that the IPO bridging funding was to ensure that there was funding to get the data sets for the fast track data. It wasn't ever intended to be a long-term funding solution. It was like a short-term responsive action.
Yeah, so is there anything on the horizon for those?
Both of the ones that were, or two of the ones that were bridged, was that they the only ones you bridged, have now been picked up by the Climate Office at ESA on a sort of couple of years basis. Beyond that, we'll see. But for now, they're stable for a couple of years.
Okay.
Paul?
Yeah, I was just going to thank Zeb, and I was going to point out something that we haven't really pointed out to one another, which is we're all trying to get the best information, no matter whether it's like, you know, nations trying to do things internally or contributing to CMIP or whatever. So, I mean, SMWF is very interested for, you know, EU agenda to get the best information possible. And that's true for climate services in every state, in every country, etc. So I think we're all pushing for the same better system. It's just a matter of how do we actually pull together and coordinate ourselves better to make sure that we're achieving a better outcome for everyone. Because I think, you know, almost every single nation and funding agency in the world, if we articulate a clear vision as to how we actually coordinate better, it's wins for everyone. Because we get better inventory information that is slow to come in from China, for argument's sake, etc. And it solves a lot of the problems that we've always been encountering as well. So I think like having that framing and the fact that it's actually a glass half full perspective, there's real incentives and, you know, reasons why this is going to pay dividends. It's a good way to think about it.
I'll go to Robert online and then I'll come to you.
Let me also express my appreciation for Zeb's insight. That was quite concise. Can I ask a sort of a technical question, which is CAMS seems to have resolved in some way this question of quasi-operational funding, and I'd be curious to know how that works.
Well, I don't know whether I have the full answer, but I may offer part of the answer, in the sense that, well, I guess CAMS now has a bit like C3S, 10 years of operation as an operational service. And it was coming from sort of other 10 years of research before that. So I think that is the journey that matters, and it's not something that happened from one day to the next. But there was, I mean, part of it was really the Copernicus program and the funding of operation. But part of it, at least, it would be great to have Laurence, Raoul, or Vincent here to have their perspective. But I think part of it has been a change in the mentality. And that's what I was referring to, the mentality at the beginning of this meeting on Monday, because it's not just funding, it's thinking that what needs to be produced serve an audience that is independent from the one of producing the data in the first place. And that change in the mentality has a number of consequences in terms of structure of the program. And some of it is reflected in the document that we are all collectively writing with the minutes. But is this set up whereby you really try to maintain that operational provision in all elements, in the documentation, in the standardization, in the user support, and the communication. So I don't know whether they fully answer your question, but maybe provided some of
well, it highlights, I guess it highlights successes that would be great to build on. I guess in particular, I'm curious sort of what is the funding mechanism? How does the money arrive at maybe we can just say Copernicus or CCS more broadly. I mean, I'm loosely aware of how ECMWF itself works, but right. I imagine it's a separate thing than the member states'
yes.
Contributions on whatever timescale they're on. But the point is you've managed to obtain funding in which you have long-term confidence.
Just to say that we do have Philip Tilkens from the Commission on our funders panel, so he'll give a bit more insight about the European kind of funding pathways in a few minutes. Okay, Vishali?
Yeah, I just wanted to support the point that Steve made. As you've seen on the first day, the data providers plot their data to look at it and evaluate it. The modeling centers download the data, plot the same thing, and kind of confirm whether things look good or bad or whatever. users would also do the same thing. So having a standard set of metrics, diagnostics, similar to what we do for modeling output, something similar for these data, forcing data sets as well would be wonderful, because that would then save a lot of time, even for the modelers as well, to then, repeat the same kind of evaluation and plot and yeah. Sure. Yes.
Louise?
Yeah, I had a couple of comments. The first one was following up on what Helene had said about the table of the funding provided for each of the forcing dataset providers. And so I don't think we should assume that the funding listed there is necessarily directly funding this effort. So in the case of land use data, NASA is listed there, but NASA is not funding the production of land use data for CMIP. They're funding other work in our lab, but we're kind of leveraging that to get this work done. So there is still a need, even if it's listed as having a funding provider there. And the other comment was following up on what Zeb said about two different modes of sustained updates, so the simple extension and then the bigger update. And I feel like there's that update category, there's actually like two subcategories within there. There's like the minor update where you're like ingesting revisions to inputs and corrections. And then there's like the more major update where you're like adding brand new variables, completely reinventing your methodology. And I think there are different users that would require different types of dataset updates. So like global carbon budget, we make an annual update for the land use data. We initially did that like just with that simple extension, like extending 1 year. And now like there's been a bigger push to like go back at least like 10, 20, 30 years and like really make sure we're using the best data possible for those like recent years, but we're not updating the entire methodology. So the early history would remain the same. So I think there's like almost a nuance there about like two different types of data set update as well as the extension. So thank you.
Aline, have you got another question? Yeah. We've got any more questions in the room or online? No. Okay, so I think we'll move on to our funders panel. So we're joined and everyone seems to be here. So we have Susan Mecklenburg from ESA wasn't able to join us because she's had a last minute requirement to go into meetings, but kindly Clément Albergel, who's the section head for the Climate and Long-Term Action Division at ESA, will be joining us. We've got Carlo, obviously, you all know him. He's in the room in terms of his position as Director of Copernicus Climate Change Services from ECMWF. Yin Huang, who's also in the room, has joined us, and she's Chief of Earth System Science and Modelling Division at NOAA. Renu Joseph is online. She's the Programme Manager for Regional and Global Modal Analysis at the Department of Energy in the US. And Philippe Toulkens is also online, and he's head of Climate and Planetary Boundaries Unit at the DG Research and Innovation at the European Commission. I'm going in alphabetical order by surname. It's no indication of any favoritism. So we're going to start with Clément, and each of the funders has a short introduction about their role, their funding landscape, and some of their kind of reflections, and then we'll have a bit of an open discussion. So I'll hand over to Clément.
Thank you very much, Eleonore. No favoritism, of course. I will try to share my screen. Let me know if you can see that.
Yep, looks good.
All good. Right, thank you. So have you figured out? I'm not Susan Mecklenburg. She sent her apologies, but could not join this afternoon due to a last-minute request, and asked me this morning to replace her on this panel discussion on the current status and potential challenges for sustained mode. So my name is Clément Albergel. I'm the acting head of the Actionable Climate Information section of ESA. The section corresponds to the former Climate Office. We are based in the UK at EXAT, and we are in charge of implementing ESA's climate program, the Climate Change Initiative. The Climate Change Initiative is a research and development program coordinated amongst ESA member states, and that main objective is to generate global, decades-long satellite data record to track and understand key aspects of the Earth system climate, the so-called essential climate variables, the ECVs, as defined by the Global Climate Observing System. And we do that by harnessing, by putting together 40 years of our own Earth observation archives and combining them with data from both third-party missions. These are missions that are not owned or operated by us at ESA, as well as current missions such as the Sentinels. The ECVs are here to advance science and inform decision-making. They can be used to guide mitigation and adaptation measures, to assess climate risk, to attribute climatic event to underlying causes, and to support operational climate services. Climate modelers use ECVs to study the drivers, the interaction and feedbacks due to climate change, as well as teleconnections, tipping element, and fluxes of energy, water, carbon, and to predict future changes. To date, we have 27 ECV projects developing relevant ECVs in the different compartments of the Earth system. That's what we call our bread and butter, the theme 1 of our climate program. We also use those essential climate variables to address specific climate questions as a request from the WCRP, but also to help countries to address their pledges toward the UNFCCC Paris Agreement. We lead on pre-operational research and development climate information. So we take our requirements, working very closely with operational climate services, and some of you are present in this room. Our role when it comes to the CMIP activity, as you know, we host the WCRP CMIP International Project Office since a few years now, since 2022. And our role is funding research and development and pre-operational development of forcing data set. We've done that recently with greenhouse gas historical concentrations and stratospheric volcanic SO2 emissions and aerosol optical properties. My colleagues in this room are in charge of this activity, but also ozone concentration. And we provide link between climate science and modeling community through projects such as the Climate Modeling User Group. ECMWF is part of this consortium, and we continuously expand the portfolio of our activities towards a new project like interfacing the climate observation and modeling communities. There is currently a call open, developing additional essential climate variable, new ECV product. On this slide, you have a link towards those two calls. I think it's probably ending this week or next week. And of course, all this wealth of data is used to make a significant contribution to the IPCC assessment report. It did so in AR6, and hopefully it will be the same in AR7. Right, working with operational services. Our role at ESA is more in the research and development support link between observation and modeling community, provide observation data, develop prototype. But a clear working relationship has been put in place over the last decade, for example, with Copernicus Climate Change Service. We organize, there is a dedicated cooperation agreement, and we develop provision of climate data records. We coordinate research and development activity, and we collaborate on pre-operational development. I think that 20 of our ECVs have now been transferred operationally to C3S, and we continuously expand to other relevant Copernicus services, such as CAMS, such as CMIP. We will be better positioned to take up the sustained mode. I see Philippe is here, and of course, the ESA RTD collaboration also lays the foundation for many Earth system science related research and development. So yes, there is a need for global alignment. It is necessary on data management, curation, data standard, but also in order to enlarge the funding pool. Of course, we need clear coordination and a transparent role for all players in this landscape. I think that's all I wanted to say to be able to fit in those 5 minutes. I just wanted to make a little bit of promotion for next ESA Living Planet Symposium that will be held next year, the last week of June in Vienna. Just to say that the abstract submission is currently open with a deadline on the 1st of December. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Clement. Right, we'll move on to Carlo.
Yeah, and thank you. Oh, is it me? Yes, it's me. Sorry. Yeah, you asked me whether I had a presentation. I didn't, but given that Clement put together a nice set of slides, then I reacted very rapidly and I put together some slides myself. Yes, just to introduce a bit what we're doing within C3S, starting a bit from where Clement left. So C3S is one of the 6 thematic services of Copernicus, is implemented on behalf of the European Commission by CNWF. And this going back to the question that was asked before, the funding works in cycle of 7 years, and there is a long-term commitment from the Commission for the program to continue. So while we are now midway through the implementation, we are already making plan for the following phase that will start in 2028 and will get into 2035. So this is true for the space segment, so the launch of satellite, retrieval of data, but is true for the services. This is us, and I like this picture that is taken during the General Assembly a couple of years ago, because it's very much a collective effort. So it's led by C3S, but actually most of the implementation is done by organization across Europe. They are of the order of 300 entities that we have some relationship with, and they are playing a vital role. So this is just a small subset of the real community that counts hundreds and hundreds of scientists. And the idea is to offer entry point to all sort of data set concerning climate, from historical observations, both in situ and satellite, to the reanalysis we discussed about global reanalysis, but also ocean reanalysis, land reanalysis, and regional reanalysis for Europe and the Arctic, as well as seasonal, decadal, and climate projections. And I think one of the elements that I think is interesting to bring here to the discussion is an interface that we launched early this year that is called Climate Pulse, and gives an instantaneous representation of where we are in terms of global temperature. And what is interesting, in my opinion, is that this helps somewhat to make climate change tangible and direct to what's happening every day. Another great effort in the program has been the publication of the European State of the Climate Report for Europe, and this is a joint effort with WMO from this year, and ESA and EUMETSAT and the national Met services of most European countries have contributed significantly to it. But the effort has been really to transform the information, and Clement was talking about ECVs. You see here some of the ECVs mapped into indicators for temperature, for greenhouse gases, but also for cryosphere and the ocean, presented as part of the State of the Climate report. And an effort is not just the operationalization of this element, but also taking care of the interface to the user. So here you look at the heat waves in 2023 across Europe, and so on. And this clearly has impact because, for instance, heat waves have an impact on heat-related mortality that in Europe has increased throughout the entire region. So we work with politicians at European level. We work with investment banks, with energy companies, with water companies, to ensure that the data feeds into their decisions as much as possible. And at times is, as I was mentioning, the work on the data, on the underpinning data, but at times is also the work on the interface and the representation so that this can feed into these decisions. So this is an example for glaciers based directly on ECVs that indicate or present the rapid and dramatic, in some cases, decline in glacier size over the European continent. We don't do this alone, not only because of the collaboration and very strong connection with ESA and EUMETSAT, but also with the other service, and in particular with the Emergency Management Service, another of these 6 services that, for instance, provide information about the hydrology across the continent, and so monitoring the situation in terms of flooding. Flooding couldn't be more of a topical issue, and I will conclude with flooding very shortly because of what's happening in Spain. extreme events are on the rise, and these have a typical an impact on activities. I just want to mention what's happening in Spain, because the discussion about climate change and enforcing and simulation is not purely academic. Actually, it's having an impact on users. So this is happening today. Is that I just took a snapshot from El País, the most read newspaper in Spain, counting. I mean, if you read Spanish, you can read what is say there, but if you don't, it basically say that there are at least 70 people killed by the current flooding. And while we were here, there were numerous journalists who were reaching out, trying to understand, is this climate change? Is it happening? What is the responsibility? So the climate change is feeding immediately in the news cycle, is feeding into policies, feeding into decision, and we feel it directly as a climate change service. And part of the discussion we are having here about the forcing or the continuous mode, actually, I think needs to be read in the context of something that is becoming topical for a very large community of users. So one small thing that we have done in that, and with this one I conclude, Eleanor, one of the things we have done in that sort of transformation from research to operation is picking up from one of the possibly most innovative element of the last IPCC report, which was the interactive atlas, and we put us an extra step into that by adding more recent data. That the atlas on the IPCC is frozen in time. We had more recent data coming from reanalysis, coming from regional models and so on, and adding more functionalities. So this is an example of things where of how we worked in the past with the community, and could potentially indicate a way forward, at least for some of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlo. And we'll move on to Yin. I'll share your slides.
Okay. Yeah. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. It's on this slide. I try to put everything in 3 slides. First, just introduce what we do from my office, and then the second slide is about the broader NOAA contribution. Then the third one is my takeaway messages contribution to this discussion. So my name is Jing Huang. I'm the chief of the Earth System Science and Modeling Division in NOAA Climate Program Office. So my office mission is to advance Earth system and social science and integrated information system and climate services to build a climate-ready nation. That's a new term for NOAA Climate Services. And there are 2 functions of our office within NOAA. One is we fund competitive grants research to the broad community, and also NOAA labs and center. And also we play we facilitate coordination and collaboration within NOAA, and also with other U.S. agencies, and also international community like a WCRP. So here I just, since this is a climate forcing discussion, I just want to pick a few examples of what kind of research we have support in the past. So I don't want to go to the detail, but I just want to highlight some of the programs support the research to improve the carbon tracker development. The carbon tracker is been contribute to, it's produced by NOAA Global Modeling Laboratory. That's the main provider for the greenhouse gas. So our research is to improve carbon tracker, and also to use carbon tracker analyze application, and also the carbon tracker methane tracker. And also some of our research program also are the users of climate forcing. For example, the new our new program called Earth Radiation Budget program try to support research to understand the impacts of aerosol injection on radiation forcing. And we also have several programs to use CMIP data to do climate attribution. And also recently we support some research projects to develop multi-decadal projection in NOAA in collaboration with GFDL and NCEI. And next slide. So this slide just show the broader NOAA contribution as mentioned by in the morning. NOAA labs are a major contributor to some key raw observation data, including greenhouse gas from the GML, NOAA GML, Global Monitoring Laboratory, and also other forcing data from NOAA, including I don't know how much much effort, but at least they contribute part of it. The volcano aerosol properties, biomass burning emission. They use NOAA's visibility data from NCEI, and also the solar data, sea surface temperature, and Vashela mentioned that the GFDL also they process and analyze the forcing data in preparation for CMIP. Next slide. Yeah, so mainly I think my 3 key messages. One is NOAA produced some key raw observation data, some large, some small, some maybe not visible. They are merged into broader data, but they all contribute to NOAA the climate forcing data set. And then our office, as I mentioned, we mainly provide support to research. We will continue to support forcing science research as part of our mission. The next is I have been sitting in this room listening, and this is not my usual community, but I have learned a lot. And also my takeaway is that I feel some sustained support and programmatic support to make this effort more sustainable. It's important. How to do that, I don't know, but I want to. I just feel I talked to Vashali in the morning. I feel since I have a lot of programmatic experience, I could help Vashali to develop some languages and also find out some mechanism to communicate with the NOAA leadership. So what Carlo mentioned in the morning is, I think, when you want to convince leadership to support, you have to convince them why they care, what's the importance, what's the benefit to their mission, and also we may need to. I need to learn what's the cost if you want to and the priority. You cannot do that all at once, and then discuss some potential mechanism to do that, and at least having some discussion with Tim and also from his presentation on seasonal forecast. Since I come from the seasonal forecast community, I think that's actually very important. So I agree with Tim that maybe meeting seasonal forecast requirement may put an actual requirement on the forcing data update, but that may also bring some actual resources from numerical weather prediction like NSAP. Original I put here is maybe the climate service people will be interested, but now I think maybe the operational seasonal forecast group will be interested. Yeah, and also I want to offer, I think at least in the US, we should approach US Global Change Research Program. That's the platform for interagency collaboration. I could work with Vashela to see how we can, at least US agencies can work together to send the message. Yeah, I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. So just before we move on to Renu, can everyone definitely make sure their microphones are off, because it's just there's some sound coming through. That's great. Renu, are you online? And I'll do the slides for you.
Can I share the slides and can you hear me? Can you hear?
Yeah, we can hear you and we can see the slides. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So Jin's presentation is a perfect lead into the way I've kind of, we have this presentation organized. We'll start off with an overview of what USGCRP is, and then go into what DOE is doing. And then I'll quickly mention how we can think about, or what are the mechanisms that, through which we can think about sustained funding, or and to keep it going. So to start up with, I'm Renu Joseph. I'm a program manager in of modeling. The modeling program is called Earth and Environmental Systems Modeling, and this is within the U.S. Department of Energy. And I am the team lead for this particular program, and I will talk a little bit more about it as we go along. So to start off with, yeah, you know, Paul Dirac indicated that it would be nice to give a quick overview of what USGCRP is. U.S. Global Change Research Program is was initiated as part of a presidential initiative in 1989. And it is to bring together agencies within the US to share and advance global change research. There are currently 15 agencies within USGCRP, and within USGCRP, there are many working groups. For instance, there's an observational working group, and then Jin Huang and I are part of the modeling working group, and so are many other agencies and people. I mean, we do have participation from the 6 major agencies within the US that is interested in Earth system modeling. So we, the interagency group is interagency group on integrative modeling, and we do, I should say, because of the importance of the forcing data sets, for instance, every year we do have a US Climate Modeling Summit, and for the past few years, Vishali Naik has been updating us about the forcing data sets and the work that is being done there. So it is information, but it does not necessarily always translate to sustained funding, as I heard the need for. So there is a lot of coordination that can be done through USGCRP activities and bodies, and we should work together on that. And more about USGCRP. USGCRP is also responsible for being the interface with the IPCC process. So it coordinates a lot of ARNM, IPCC related activities within the US. And also the National Climate Assessment, the US National Climate Assessment is something that this body, the USGCRP, coordinates. So what's done during the CMIP process gets downscaled, and a lot of information is used for the following and upcoming NCA. I also think it's important to note that there is a USGCRP mandate to provide information for climate change and climate trend information for from 25 to 100 years. And so that's kind of something that I think has been brought up before. Now, quickly shifting over to DOE. We are part of the Earth and Environmental Systems Modeling Program, and the overall goal of the program is to advance modeling and simulation capabilities to enhance the predictability of the Earth system in support of DOE's science and security mission. We do, as part of this portfolio, look at the Earth system and bring the modeling capabilities through an integrated modeling framework, What I mean by that is that we do have on the left-hand side, you can see the Earth system model development activities that are there, and we fund and support the energy exascale Earth system model. Through that, there are activities that I'm primarily responsible for, which is the regional and global model analysis part of the portfolio that brings together a hierarchy of models, including the E3SM, to understand the Earth system better. So you look at the different components of the Earth system and try to understand how they interact and understand more about the Earth system through that. The multi-sector dynamics component that my other colleague manages looks at the interaction between the natural and the human system. And all three of these activities have, in some sense, contributed to the forcing capabilities that you are that are being discussed there. At the bottom, you do see the importance, the different activities that are of high interest to the program. We are interested in understanding extreme weather, coastal systems, understanding the integrated water cycle, the integrated biogeochemical cycle, high latitudes because of their impact across the globe. And also we, in the same program, are able to look at urban morphology and energy infrastructure related activities. So this is just a quick overview of the program before I indicate the kind of data sets and the work that we are supporting that is relevant to this discussion. For instance, PCMDI is part of the portfolio that I manage, and PCMDI over the ever since CMIP7 has been creating the sea surface temperature and the sea ice boundary condition data sets. Moving on, my colleague Zuxing Davis, through the model development activity, supports the SEDS activity, and that activity has been going on for the past, I'd say 10 years, but maybe I'm wrong, but it has been going on for a long while. And then we also, my colleague Bob Valario's portfolio that focuses on multi-sector dynamics has been supporting activities of Brian O'Neill, Claudia Tibaldi, and others to work on scenario MIP related activities through what is called the GSIMS projects. This is the Global Change Intersectoral Modeling Systems activity. The multi-sector dynamics activity also is responsible for the global change analysis model, or the GCAM model, that all of you are familiar with. In addition to all this, we as a team, I mean, Zuxing, Bob, and I, all are interested and co-support CMIP forcing data sets, for instance, OMIP and LMIP activities. We do contribute to that through, so there is DOE contribution as well as contribution from NOAA and NSF for that. So that was about forcing per se. Right now, I'd like to also highlight the other activities that our portfolio is supporting. We are through as part of DOE, for instance, Earth System Grid Federation, the ESGF2 is being supported through the data management program, which is a sister program to the modeling activity. And then we do support input for MIPS, the different analysis metrics and diagnostics packages like PMP, ILAMP. Those are being done through different projects, but they are all coordinated, and we also create the interface for CMEC. which is the coordinated model evaluation capabilities. And that framework is also interested in contributing to the CMIP rapid evaluation framework. So these are just a suite of activities that are going on. And I'll leave this slide up and just react to some comments that I heard in the previous discussion. One thing I'd like to mention is that at least as part of DOE, we do support activities that are ongoing, but we are primarily interested in research. So the research component of what you talk about, the research component of what is needed for forcing data sets, if it's emphasized, there is more of a chance of it being funded. Then the other thing I want to mention is that USGCRP is also a venue that helps and facilitates with the coordination of activities. And as I indicated earlier, Jin Huang and I are involved quite a bit, very actively in the interagency group for integrative modeling. I think it would be very useful for the international perspective also to be brought in to this. And Vaishali has been doing a great job in presenting to us at least once a year, but bringing the needs to the USGCRP groups would be quite useful and a good venue. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Renu. And last but not least, Philippe.
Yeah, I'll share the presentation. Let me know if you see it in full screen mode or not.
It's not currently in full screen, but there's sometimes a small lag.
Just a second. Here, you see it now?
Yeah. Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for having me. I will have the most sober presentation without fancy graphics, but I just simply try to answer the questions that were sent to us. So first, to introduce ourselves. From the European Commission, I would like to say first my admiration for CMIP in general. We rarely have, well, we don't use enough the opportunity to thank the scientists for the remarkable work done in such initiatives. And people working in CMIP really need to know that they serve as a role model for other modeling communities, in particular integrated assessment modeling, energy modeling, and other types of modeling. I mean, all the methods, the practices done in CMIP over the years are serving as example to others, and I need to highlight this. So we count on you to keep the scientific standard and to ensure sustained and good organization in the future. That was for an introduction. Who we are? Well, the program Horizon Europe, you certainly know about. And for the non-Europeans, it may be confusing to see that you have so many entities funding activities that look similar. That's Europe. It's always great, but sometimes a bit complicated. So the Horizon Europe is a big research program that actually complements the research being funded by the EU member states and the associated countries to Horizon Europe. Some non-EU member states are associated to Horizon Europe, and they also fund research and benefit from the program, of course. So roughly the order of magnitude of our investment is in climate science, 40 million euros per year. And but more widely, 35% of the funding provided in Horizon Europe, roughly 30 billion euros per year, is climate relevant. It's not all on modeling, of course, but in all areas. So this is a very important political commitment to fund climate relevant activity through its research program and to serve the policy, of course. We try to be impactful. We think that our program is delivering publications that are impactful, and we measure this through the impact on IPCC reports, but also we have other metrics to that we use. We, of course, what we do is we program research, so it means that we publish calls for proposals, and then the projects are being evaluated, implemented, and we use the output of the project to inform the policy. And we keep reflecting also of what is coming up in the future, what are the research gaps, and we always collect from the scientific communities good suggestions on research gaps. There's a report there that you can see on research gap. This is one example, but we have many other sources to make sure that all programs are relevant, complement what the EU member states are funding, and are well integrated in the international research and innovation activities. So the first question I was asked to address is, do you see a need for sustained and regular delivery of forcing data sets along ongoing forcing science research? So we clearly support. You can replace here on the slide operationalization, because it's too complicated to pronounce, by sustain, because I understand you had discussion on the exact wording. We are happy with sustained activities on climate projection as part of the governance of climate policy. This is very clear and very useful for us. These sustained activities need to be, though, complemented by new developments funded through research innovation. This is key for us, is that we always need to update the activities to what research innovation brings in, and new developments need to be integrated in the standard schemes. Forcing dataset is part of this endeavor for CMIP, but also for the whole modeling chain across modeling communities. We want to feed the policy-making process, but this requires clear, coordinated, sustained, and updated delivery that is provided on a timely manner. To the second question, with your own funding landscape, can you envisage both sustained mode and research fitting within your funding models and organizational structures? Yes, well, there are special needs, of course, advancement in AI, data management, research infrastructure, and these words are quite important, because in Horizon Europe, we mostly work with projects that have a limited duration, 4 or 5 years typically. So instruments for sustained financing in Horizon Europe don't exist per se. But through the mobilization of the EU member states and associated countries, through the research infrastructure and possibly technology infrastructure that are also being developed, it could be envisaged to further support CMIP activities over the longer term. But this can be done only if this is clearly supported by the member states and the associated countries. So the mobilization needs to occur not only at EC level or EU level, but also in connection with the member states and associated countries to Horizon Europe. What solution do you think your organization can contribute to? So we try to answer the question. What we can address in Horizon Europe is the research innovation dimension of the activities. But of course, this can also contribute to the operational activities as well, at the condition that it keeps an R&I dimension. Otherwise, it may be difficult to fund at some point. But we can also explore whether other programs could fund CMIP activities, like Digital Europe, that is the program that funds Destination Earth. And one needs to look at all the relevant instruments. I was in touch with my colleague from DG Connect. The presentation here is so short, I can't go in any detail, but it needs to be explored both ways, because both program Horizon Europe and Digital Europe are not necessarily funding the same activities, but they can complement and support CMIP from one or another angle. We contribute to bringing together modeling communities. This is very important in the EU. And we also promote different approaches in the same field and working across disciplines, beyond climate modeling or beyond work done between national scientists. The connection with the socioeconomic research, socioeconomic modeling, and social science and humanities in general is absolutely key for policymaking, and we make great efforts in this regard. We promote model developments and also very importantly, transparency in the activities and open access to the tools. This is fundamental. We have some progress there, but it's not yet sufficient. We strongly believe that we can do good science, in particular climate science, only if the tools are available at least to the peers and if not to everyone. And last slide, what is your view on the need for global alignment and how this could be facilitated? So global alignment is, of course, welcome on shared goals and principles, including open access, data sharing, transparency, and also a common effort on capacity building. In particular, on international cooperation, we see that usually it's always the same entities that are funding the activities, and we would really welcome an effort to try to widen the pool of funding entities. Being in the IPCC activities and in the meetings, we see that some countries that have the capacity to fund also research activities don't engage. We probably need to look at those partners who could fund activities in the future, and that will also improve the international cooperation and mutual understanding on CMIP activities across the world. So we favor cross sectors, cross countries, cross governmental level of governance and activities. Together, we do it better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Thank you very much to all of our funders, and I also just want to say thank you for all of the funding that you do to support CMIP and associated activities. Now I'm going to open up to the floor to see if we have some questions that we'd like to raise with yourselves while we have the 5 of you who can maybe provide some further insight building on what you've just introduced. So have we got some questions from the floor or online? Helene?
Hi, it's Helene Hewitt here. I'm the CMIP co-chair. And so thanks from me, from all of you, for all the funding that you have given CMIP and continue to do so. It's very much appreciated. And thanks for those introductions. I think Philip's kind of indicated this, but I sort of wanted to ask it across the board. Is, we see a lot that the forcing has very many different dimensions and data sets that are needed. And I was, it would be great if we could work with all the funders together openly so that we can ensure that everything is funded, but the burden is shared. And, so I'm just wondering if you can indicate if that's something that other people, apart from Philippe, would be, keen to do so.
Maybe Jin, you can.
As I mentioned earlier, I don't think I can make any commitment. Yeah. And also it's beyond my level, but I definitely will work with Sheila and also Renew and other US agency managers to bring the message up. But I think one thing maybe after this workshop, maybe the team co-chairs can develop some consistent messages for all the agencies to bring the message, to bring up,
Could I just maybe ask what format is most appropriate, or does it need to be, is it?
Yeah, the format doesn't matter to me. The key messages as like the why they are important, what are the challenges, what maybe some level of estimate the costs.
Yeah.
And also maybe showing like European countries putting money in what magnitude, that will also put some pressure on US. Yeah.
Vice versa. Yeah, thank you, Jen. John, online?
So I had a specific question relating back to the morning session. There was a discussion about the potential synchronization of timings of products And in the US, we have the National Climate Assessment. There's the IPCC reports 7 to 8 years, and now this global stock take every 5 years. And we've had a lot of pressure against trying to synchronize to the IPCC reports, as within CMIP as a research activity. But then, as we've said, that all these great discussions about the needs for regular sustained activities. From the program manager perspective, what do you all think is the appropriate punctuated cycling that you could most easily justify for this sustained support?
Renew, do you maybe want to come in first?
That was a tough question. I think from at least seeing how things have moved on in the US, it is very difficult to say what is the cycle for sustained funding and how to bring that about. I was thinking about a similar activity and the formation of a consortium that works on forcings and bringing together different agency program managers across the world to talk about their contribution and have that discussion going might be an avenue, is what I was thinking. The reason I'm suggesting that is I was thinking of the CICE or the CICE consortium as an example where they come together and work on different aspects of the CICE, what is needed for the CICE model. So I don't think there is a perfect cycle that we need to synchronize with, at least from the US point of view. It's just a thought, but it needs more discussion. And John is also part of the Climate Modeling Summit. He's one of the members of that. And so this is something that we should discuss more within the US, and then we can talk about it externally.
Thank you, Renew. Clement, do you maybe want to sort of give an indication of the kind of cycle at ESA and how that could work?
Definitely, thanks, Eleanor, and thanks for all the comment so far. We have to go to our member state every 3 years, roughly, to obtain funding. So as soon as it is done, a bit like what Carlos was saying, you have to start again. But I think the cycling is extremely important, but not always possible due to all the administrative mechanism we need to go through. We need, for example, to wait for the IPCC next assessment report to decide on which special report they will develop to be able to focus our effort on this. And by the time we open an invitation to tender, open competitiveness, of course, you can have 6 months. Then the consortium needs to work on this activity, and if it has to be picked up by the IPCC assessment report, it needs to be published in high-level journal. So between the ID or IPCC focusing on a dedicated activity, us setting up a research consortium, and the research consortium being successful to publish high-level research, you can have more than a year or 2 years. So it's extremely difficult, also extremely important. So being able to know better in advance the focus on, for example, IPCC is quite relevant for all our activity.
I'll come to Philippe, you next.
Oh, yeah. Well, just to reply to Clement, knowing earlier what the IPCC may do, I think that is difficult. Being working in the IPCC as well, I think it's already quite remarkable that we know what is the next special report. We know somehow by when some of the working group reports will have to be delivered. But okay, I don't want to go into discussion on that. I'm just thinking it's very complicated to change the timetable of the IPCC. And the programming timetable in Horizon Europe is even much lower than what it is in ESA. So I envy you, Clément. But what I raised my hand to ask to the CMIP colleagues, I mean, is there a document placing a clear what you need to identify the menu, estimated costs, and information on who funded what in the past? And then I think the best solution is to bring around the table the relevant funding entities and to explore the possibility to invite new ones. And then we would share the pleasure or the burden or the opportunity, as you put it, as you like.
So essentially like a brochure of everything proposed that we need to make happen, and then bring everyone together and see who has the capacity to put in the pot as such.
Yes, I understand that WCRP intends to do that later in this year. Could there be a link with that, because they are exploring the possibility to gather all the the big funding agencies around the world. So maybe the needs of CMIP could be integrated in this global discussion.
Yeah, I think we can pick up with the secretariat at WCRP and see if we can align that and make use of that opportunity. Thanks, Philippe. Carlo?
Thank you. My point was probably going back to the first question and the observation from Philippe about the multilateral funding, because I think this is not an exercise can be done unilaterally by any organization. So it's not a matter of Copernicus, ESA, ECNWF, NOAA, NASA, or anyone else to fund this activity. I think this is about having a set of priorities that are shared, that are clear, and a sort of a common framework for this investment to be done multilaterally, and now to organize that. So I think that's the key element of the discussion. And going back to what I was saying before, that Zeb's presentation, I think we need to fund all the elements in that ecosystem. So funding the research, and it was clear from the discussion of the last 2 days that there is a lot of research that needs to be funded, and increasing the visibility of the importance of this research. But we need to fund also this continuous mode, the continuous uptake. And in that sense, having also shorter cycle and funds that are dedicated for that task. So we don't need to make it look like research. It's not. It's not about writing paper. I mean, a paper may come out as a nice to have, but it's not the goal per se. I think would be very, very useful. So if we can have maybe as an output of this workshop, some sort of a common mindset or common framework for funding structure that can fund both activities, so both the research and the continuous update, I think that would be brilliant.
So in that sort of way of putting together the total ambition and the total costs and resources, we can clearly highlight what is research potentially and what is more operational or software engineering, for example. We could, how we make that clear, we need to think about quite carefully, I think.
Yeah, sorry if I come back on this, because I'm worried that we just think about the software engineering part and the technical element. I think there is one part that is not software engineering and is really this mindset that was mentioning when talking about C3S and comes actually in response to the question on how it operates, and is about the documentation, is about the quality control, is about the user support. All of these elements, well, in a sense, are engineering in the broad sense of the word, but are not technical in terms of piece of software. It's more than that.
Yeah, we need to include everything, I think. Philippe, do you want to come back on that?
Yes, sorry to come back in very specifically on this point. I would suggest not to really see a clear separation between research and operations, because it's a cycle more than it's a loop. more than really two parallel tracks. What I said is that through Horizon Europe, we can fund research innovation activities. Yes, it needs to have a research component, but the frontier between research and operation is not that rigid. And of course, it doesn't make sense to pursue research for research. At some point, the output of research need to be used somewhere. So that's why we need to not to present this in a way that is oversimplified.
Thank you. Matt?
Yeah, I think this is a really rich and useful discussion. So I also want to thank the organizers for getting the funders around the table as well. I think that this is super useful. Yeah, I just have a few sort of free flowing thoughts. One is that, you know, there's a funding discussion, I think, for the long-term sustainability, but there's also a funding discussion for the fast track. And I'm curious what people think about, are we appropriately funded for the fast track? Or is there something that we should inject at this point in time? The other thing, and I completely agree with Carlo and what's been said before, is that, you know, okay, we can talk about a sustained mode and operationalization compared to research, but I think that there's also a middle ground, which is work that enables research, right? And I think that a lot of what we're talking about here is work. It may not be research in and of itself, although there are very strong research elements, but clearly what it's also doing is enabling others to do their research. And I wonder if there's a way that we can frame this for the funding ask in order, you know, to bring that component in. The other thing that I observe is that, you know, as we're talking, I mean, I recognize funding structures are different in different regions, let's say, but I'm also curious what the funders around the table think about funding, for example, in the US case, federal scientists versus sort of more university versus academic, and how we streamline those two elements, because they're obviously different, generally different elements. So whether it's DOE versus NSF in the US case, or ESA versus Horizon Europe in the European case. Yeah, and then fundamentally to ask, like, are the current funding sources fit for purpose? And I think that's sort of where we were getting to, is that maybe there's actually something new that needs to come together to sort of recognize that there's a web of different efforts that all need to be funded sort of in a coordinated manner. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Carlo? Or was it Anka? Sorry.
I was thinking, listening to Philippe and Carlo, about the distinction between research and operations. I think this document could effectively be a set of steps that need to be got through in order to achieve what we want to achieve in this cyclical manner, or however we regard the process as flowing. And then that doesn't distinguish rigidly between research and operations, and makes it clear pathway between how the research will actually turn into something that's practical. So I think it's just a matter of framing rather than changing the requirement for this kind of succinct summary of what's needed.
Helene just wants to come out and comment on that point directly.
I think Matt might have said this, but just to Philippe's point about bringing the research back into the more sustained thing, I think there's also the reverse, that actually having the sustained and operational product will actually be an impetus for more research, and it will support that as an ongoing activity. And we've seen that obviously in weather and seasonal forecasting. So I think, yeah, it's a two-way thing, and we should make that clear, I think.
I think Paul and then Jen.
Yeah, I was just going to make a pretty simple, actually I was probably going to give Jean an action item, because you've given us an action item. I'm going to throw him back at you and everyone else that's actually representing the funding panel. Brain dead zero thing to do right now that doesn't require anyone to pull a checkbook out of their back pocket is to figure out what we're doing and what we're actively doing that's already funded activities at the moment. So I know that Copernicus Climate Change Surface for the moment is thinking about model documentation, QC, a whole bunch of other things that are happening to the CMIP6 archive. So what stuff do we have at the moment that you're actually underway doing, or maybe even delivered, that can actually be fed back into this system that is not asking anyone to fund anything new. It's just coordinating the activities far, far better, and also bringing those activities up for the benefit of CMIP7, for example. So this is not quite forcing specifically, but I think to answer Matt's point at the moment, I think we're probably okay for the fast track, hopefully. If there's major issues, it would be good to know about them now, because you've got a whole bunch of funding folks here that could potentially help out. But if we just coordinate a bit better, so I think, if we do have things that within DOE, for argument's sake, and I can help Bruno put this together, that we're doing and we're not communicating that well, let's do it. NOAA, same situation, ESMWF, etc. Because I think we're all pointing in the same direction, but we're not coordinating those activities. And if we coordinate them first, then we can actually figure out, where the holes are and then how we fund the holes.
Jen?
Yeah. Yeah, that's something doable. Yeah, so actually, as somebody in NOAA who's coordinated to connect observation with modeling, I got a lot of input from Kramer. Yeah, Ryan Kramer. He already developed big table on that. I raised my hand just to comment on this space to enable research and also to transition research to operation. I hate to brag about this. I used to be working on this. NOAA has some idea called test bed. Basically, in some center it's a physical test bed. So allow people to test their research before research is transitioned to operational models or data sets. So that's also this test bed can also help document the improvement, but that test bed needs resources. Actually, it's a computer resource, also human. Yeah, so that's some idea. I think Gavin some kind of mentioned that idea. NOAA actually has these terms. Yeah, thanks.
Carlo?
Yeah, thank you. First, it was a reaction to what Philippe said about operation and research. Yes, I see where you're coming from. I wasn't sort of suggesting to have the two split. I think we need to have a cycle on one feeding into the others, and the example that was just made, I think, is a very good example of how this can be done. But what I was specifically arguing is to have across the different organization and the continent a specific set of resources designed for operations. So I'm not arguing that we don't need funding for research. Absolutely, it's fundamental. And actually, if anything, we have to increase it. But I'm sort of arguing that there is the need of putting aside a pot of money to support the continuous operation and the continuous mode. And I think that's notwithstanding the fact that actually there is a feedback mechanism that also needs to be supported from, as Eline was saying, from operation into research. On Paul, the output of you were mentioning the output of Copernicus and the visibility. Well, in a sense, I feel they are already on the system. So we are working with the ESGF, and to a large extent, these are already fed back. On the general discussion and linking to my first point, so about the funding for operation, maybe a concrete outcome, and this feeds directly into the session tomorrow somehow, but a concrete outcome of this could be some level of an extended funding panel or funders panel beyond this workshop, so that some level of coordination can happen on this funding opportunity. So there are program managers on the two sides of the Atlantic. Maybe there will be others from Asia coming in the future. Well, having a sort of coordination among those entities on what are the priorities and how to divide the responsibility for both research and operation, I think will be extremely valuable.
Thanks, Carlo. Zeb?
I'll keep rolling in the potentially some concrete things which might help. So yeah, we just did a proposal with ESA, and one of the requirements for that was documenting everything that came out. And I think actually for the funders, having these, it felt relatively strict, but also very clear requirements about what we want the outputs to look like was very, very helpful. You know, when we actually did our planning, we didn't just plan for the research, we also had to put in the end every single product we made, like time to make sure that we documented it properly, and you build that into your work plans and you build it into the costs. And I think actually ratcheting the requirements on research in some cases might be helpful to focus the mind that the output of this is not just a paper and you hope that you can never do it again, but the output is a paper and we want you to be able to show us how you did it. You know, either reproducibility requirements, documentation requirements, whatever it is. But that's something you can put from the funders side to really help lift the standard of research, I would say. And it might actually also help with some of this kind of infrastructure or enabling science stuff. Because if you know you need to do this, you also know you need to go and find someone who understands how to do this if you don't have that capacity already. And so you start to also think about what it might take, what costs you might need. So that might be a way to help actually lift the standard or get some of these outcomes that comes from the funders side, rather than us telling the funders what we want to do. They tell us what they want to see.
And potentially if there's collaboration between the funders, so all the requirements are the same and consistent.
Yeah, and that's where Carlo's idea of, you have some uniformity about this is how we want it to look and this is how it should look and here's how someone else did it, and fit the mold.
Yeah. Matt?
Yeah, just very briefly, because Paul provocatively asked what holes are there in the fast track. There was a missing row in the funding data set, which is the scenario forcings. So if any funder feels like they are funding that activity, I would love to chat with them, because this is something we're actively looking for. Thanks.
Thanks for highlighting that, Matt. Can I maybe just ask our funders just for like a quick 30-second final thought? So I'll start with Philippe, because you were last the first time. So just a final thought on the discussion today.
I think I exhausted my speaking time already, but just final thought. No, I'm really curious to receive also the information from you on what are your needs and how you will bring this conversation further, mobilize the funding entities, include new ones. And I'm quite confident that if your plan and your request is clearly formulated, it will be welcomed and supported.
Thank you. And Renu?
I resonated with the fact that people said that there needs to be this ongoing discussion amongst the funders to make sure that we understand the different needs, and also we need to understand exactly what the needs of the group are, and having a good documentation for that is good, but it's also important to have a discussion among the funders. And this was brought up, I think, by a couple of people. So, and that's exactly where, I was also suggesting something like a consortium where the different funders come together and talk about things on a semi-regular basis would be good. Thanks.
Thank you. And Jen?
Yeah, I think before I came to the meeting, I didn't realize the importance of the issue. So I think if I don't know, maybe a lot of other people don't know. So I think I agree with Carlo. So the group needs to raise the visibility of the issue and then also make a consistent message. And then at least I will take the message to our own agency and also work with other US agencies to find a way to support the sustained mode.
Thank you. Carlo?
I feel a bit like Philip. I intervene a lot. I feel like my time is largely over. I do believe that this coordination that we were just mentioning is probably one of the most important elements. Possibly there are multiple time horizons. So there is a long time horizon that where we can take advantage, and there is a shorter time horizon because there are resources that are lined up and are available even now within ESA or within ECNWF that can be used to make some quick win if this is of interest. So I think we can look at both because I guess when discussing these things, one thing is the first step and the other is the long-term vision. Thank you.
And Clement, just a final thought from you?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. I just want to react on the last comment. I think the requirement and the traceability are very important for us from a funding point of view to better justify what we are doing, and also we need indeed and to better coordinate further our activity between the different actors of the funding to try to have a better to better streamline research to operation, and perhaps to simplify all our procedures to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much to all of our funders panel and everyone for the really great discussion. I think we possibly have quite a big to-do list now, so we will get cracking on that, and we'll be in touch with everyone to follow up on any points that they want to clarify, and also look at that sort of coordination mechanism for getting the funders together on a more regular basis and interacting closely with this group and others. So thank you very much. We'll now go to afternoon coffee break and then back at 4 o'clock, where we have some breakout sessions. So you'll get a bit of movement happening then. So thanks, everyone.